Hello, amazing people, and welcome back to the Ryan Files. Today we step into the shadows of American history, where legends blur into secrets and truths hide between the lines. You may know the official story, Wild West outlaw Jesse James gunned down by Bob Ford in 1882, a dramatic ending to a legendary life. But what if that ending never happened? In this episode, we uncover family testimonies, long-buried journals, cryptic clues, and bold claims that suggest Jesse James may have faked his own death and lived on under a new identity, playing a far deeper game than history ever recorded. Some of what you'll hear is drawn from generational accounts, personal interpretation, and historical research that challenges the official record. This episode is here to spark curiosity, not declare absolute truth. We're never here to tell you what to think. We're here to ask the questions no one else will. So saddle up, follow the trail, because this is the Ryan Files. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on the Ryan Files this week. I'm really excited about this one, and I'll tell you why, because we are going to be talking about Jesse James. That's right, the outlaw from the Old West. We got his great-grandchildren here on the Ryan Files with us today. Daniel J. Duke and sister Teresa F. Duke. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be awesome. So you wrote a book. It's called The Mysterious Life and Faked Death of Jesse James. So immediately it's like, okay, we're in it. We got some intrigue going on. So why don't you guys just kind of like break down the story? Obviously, I think most people know who Jesse James is, but I don't know that everyone really knows who Jesse James is. So why don't you go ahead and just kind of break the background down here for us?
Okay. Do you want to go first, Teresa?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. After you.
No, you go first.
Oh, okay. So anyway, okay, Jesse James, for those who don't know, he was America's most famous outlaw in the 1800s. After the Civil War, post-Civil War, he got his start with Quantrill's guerrillas during the Civil War. He was one of the youngest. Well, he wasn't the youngest, but he was one of the younger members of the guerrillas. The story goes that, Jesse was born in Kearney, Missouri, Clay County, Missouri, and he grew up on this family farm. The Civil War, a lot of people don't realize that before the Civil War started, for about almost a decade before it started, there was raiding back and forth from Kansas, which was a free state, into Missouri, which was a slave state, and the raiding was back and forth, over politics, whatever. And it was started, of course, like with most wars, with politics. But a lot of the people involved in that, like for Jesse, Jesse's the perfect example. He's a topic anyway. He was a young boy. His brother Frank was already away when the war started. Frank had joined the Confederacy. Jesse was on his farm plowing. He was too young to join. And they wouldn't accept him. So he was on the farm plowing the field, and some Union-backed guerrillas from Kansas rode onto the farm. They beat Jesse, strapped him to a plow, rode down to the farmhouse, and they beat his mother and hung his stepfather, Reuben Samuel. And Reuben didn't die, but he was permanently brain damaged from that. And after that, most people can I guess associate with the feeling of needing revenge, especially when you're a kid, you're a teenage boy, somebody just pushed your mom around and beat you. There's a war going on. They were considered the enemy side. He wanted revenge, and he went looking to join up. Nobody would accept him except for Quantrill's guerrillas. And that's where Jesse got his start. He quickly became one of the most deadly guerrillas of the group. And he rode under William Bloody Bill Anderson. After the Civil War had ended, Confederate soldiers were granted amnesty, but the guerrillas, Quantrill's guerrillas, were branded outlaws, and they weren't granted amnesty. So they had several choices to make. They could either turn themselves in, which Jesse tried to surrender, and he got a bullet through his chest for trying to surrender. He survived that. He knew, if you surrender, you're gonna die. If they catch you, they're gonna execute you. So he could either become an outlaw or leave the country, and he chose to become an outlaw, and that's where their outlaw career began. They robbed. It was the first peacetime daylight bank robbery in American history, and they robbed the bank in Liberty, Missouri. It said they got away with $60,000 back then, and just looking, I don't know the number right off the top of my head, but 60,000 in the 1860s today would be probably 20 million, 2 million. It would be millions of dollars. So I mean, that was a big take. It was a huge take. They got away with that, and they just kept robbing. And it went on for years. Nobody knew exactly what he looked like. They didn't have an accurate description of him. And descriptions they did have always varied. I'll get into that later, or Teresa can. But the descriptions they had of Jesse always varied. Some said he was of average height. Some said he was extremely, he's very tall. John Newman Edwards described him as a tall, finely molded man. So, I mean, there's a lot of different descriptions of him, and that was one of the reasons he got away with it so long.
That's incredible. I mean, you got to know your enemy, so to speak. And if you don't, I mean, you can't even tell height, and that's incredible. And probably.
Wonder, they would also talk about how he would disguise his looks, his appearance sometimes with dyeing his hair. So that was always throwing things off too.
Yeah. So this guy's not only he's clever. I mean, let's face it.
It's not like they had media back then, like we are always taking pictures today. So I think it was easier back then to get away with what he got away with. Today, I can't even imagine people getting by with something like that.
Yeah. And especially when you say this was the first daylight bank robbery. Obviously it speaks of being a little bit brazen, but nobody else has ever done this before. And maybe they just said, well, why not? And obviously it worked. They didn't have the correct things in place to stop it, it sounds like, or even be prepared for what to do if it happens.
Yeah. I think it caught the country off guard. I mean, nobody had done that before. And now the guerrilla tactics they learned during the Civil War, that was perfect practice for robbing banks, trains, whatever. I mean, they constantly went up against superior forces, superior numbers, and they got away unscathed, except for when he tried to surrender at the end of the war. So, and then to rob the bank, nobody'd done that before. And I do think it caught everybody off guard.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And obviously getting shot in the chest is probably a really good deterrent to turn yourself in ever again.
Oh, yeah.
That's wild. So here we have the backstory of this legend, and I didn't realize it, but you just said it's the largest legend in America, outlaw legends. That's awesome. I remember growing up, I was born in Pennsylvania. Growing up, I knew all about Jesse James. I'd be out playing in the woods and I was Jesse James, and it was awesome. So tell us a little bit about this story. Obviously, one of the biggest, parts of this book that you've written is he faked his death. And you have done the research, and just your story out of the gate, talking about how nobody really knew who he was, his height, all this stuff, and using guerrilla tactics. Very smart, obviously. All of a sudden, this idea of faking your death seems like, wow, this could really happen. This guy had at least the intellectual side to think this through in a way that you could get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and a lot of people also don't know. I mean, that's the kind of thing you rarely see in movies, and a lot of books haven't mentioned it. In 1879, he tried to fake his death in 1879. That attempt failed. They were at the time, Oklahoma was Indian territory, and they were in Indian territory. There was a big reward out for Jesse. His fellow gang member,
George Shepherd.
yeah, George Shepherd, rode into town and claimed, I shot Jesse, shot him in the back of the head while we were riding, down the trail. Anyway, he shot him and wanted the reward. And the sheriff he wasn't just going to pay him a reward. They wanted a body. They needed evidence. So they went out looking. The sheriff and the posse, they couldn't find a body. And so it all fell apart. A few weeks later, Jesse, and it hit the news. Jesse James alleged dead. Jesse James killed by own gang member, things like that. And it didn't work. They didn't have a body. And a few weeks later, Jesse was spotted in another area. So that just fell apart.
Okay.
Later in 1882, when a perfect plan came together where he had an opportunity to fake his death through his cousin, Wood Height.
Right. Yeah. So he had a cousin that just passed away of natural causes or an accident, or what happened?
That was Wood Height was his first cousin, and all historical accounts have said he and Jesse bore a striking resemblance to Jesse. And I thought, well, they're first cousins, they're in the same family. It doesn't, it adds up. But Wood it said he considered himself a ladies' man, and he was married. And from everything we've found, he was the one who was married to Z Mills, not Jesse. Z Mills was their first cousin, but Jesse didn't marry her. It was Wood Height. And there's a lot of evidence in the books about that. Yeah, I'll get into that later. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So Wood Height saw himself as a ladies' man. He had an affair with Bob and Charlie Ford's sister. Her name was Martha Bolton. She was a widow. She had a farmhand named Jim Gibson, and Jim and Wood got into a fight. Long story short, Jim and Wood got into a fight. Wood killed Jim, and Bob, I can't remember if it was Bob or Charlie, killed Wood. And they hit him in the back of the head. Now, if you've seen the movie The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, that's a long title, but that they show how Wood Height was killed by the Ford brothers. And in the movie's depiction, it's not fact, but it was just a movie's depiction. Wood Height was running up the stairs, and they aimed up and shot him, which would account for, the bullet going in the back lower part of his skull. Anyway, they buried Wood. The ground was frozen at the time. They buried him in basically covered him with brush and rocks. They said a shallow grave, but the ground was frozen, too hard to dig, so they covered him up to keep animals from getting him. And just about a month and a half to 2 months later, Jesse was killed. So a lot of people, and it was convenient. They said Jesse was killed in April. It was just a month, and it was shortly after, right around the time the ground would have been thawing. And then when you look at the photos and compare them, and that's a whole different topic, but it ties in with it just later on if you want. I have a habit of jumping all over the place with this. But there's, let's see. So Wood Height was passed off as Jesse, to make the story to say it simply. The photograph. Oh, go ahead.
And they looked incredibly. It was a good opportunity because they said that Wood Height and Jesse had bore an incredible resemblance to each other. So I think it was like a great opportunity to to take the opportunity to actually maybe fake his death and live out the rest of his life.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, obviously it makes sense in it. So obviously, if this is what happened, it worked.
Yeah, it worked. It worked great. And Jesse had been living in Texas since 1871. They were still robbing, but there's a lot of accounts where they would hit a stagecoach, a train, a bank, and it'd be half a state away on the same day or the following day. And it seemed almost like you'd have to be almost inhuman to get from this robbery to that robbery in that short amount of time back then on horseback. So it was guerrilla tactics they were using. A lot of the robberies they did, it was the James gang, but they weren't all tied. They weren't all present all the time. Like Jesse didn't hit every bank he was accused of hitting, and that was also played into their hands. It was, you're using different tactics. It's keeping people confused, and the descriptions don't match.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's brilliant. Once again, and man, if you can get other people robbing banks and they're blaming on you, I mean, you know that your tactics are working.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. And well, and you know, Jesse, like I said, he lived in Blevins, Texas, in 1871. We've got his diary from 1871 to 1876, and in the diary, he signed his name J. James and his initials JWJ. And there's a lot of the diary is full of known gang members. He signs his own name as J. James and his initials. He even documented. There was a trip they went on. Of course, he didn't say we robbed a bank. He would just say, you know, me and the boys, and he would use nicknames like Bud, Buck, which was Bud was Cole Younger's nickname. Buck was Frank James' nickname. So he would use their nicknames, and he never wrote about his feelings. It was what we call it a diary. It was more like a day book, a journal of everything he did. But anyway, the robberies he detailed are the trip he took to Louisiana with the boys. Every place he was in, there was a robbery at that time, exactly at the time he was there. And it just, when you add up the photos matching, which we've had matched, verified by the Texas Department of Public Safety, they're our state police, our version of the state police, Austin Police Department Photographic Forensic Lab, and a group out of New Jersey called Physionics, who got bought out later by Identics. They were world leaders in facial recognition technology and sold their software to international airports and the military. So we had three separate groups of highly qualified experts verify that our photos matched known photos of the James family and Jesse, and it was down to, like, with his mother, same missing arm, same dress, same cloth and pattern on the dress, same eyeglasses. They look alike. There's just so much evidence we've got. It's irrefutable.
wow.
We've also got DNA, and I now feel like I'm rambling, but the exhumation that they did in 1995 in Kearney, in Mount Olivet Cemetery, our late mother spearheaded the investigation into that exhumation. She, no pun intended, but she shot their results full of holes. The teeth that they said they matched the DNA from the teeth to known family members. First of all, the known family member they claimed was known as a very questionable lineage. It's the nicest way to put it. He called after mom and came out with that and called her every name in the book. That was shortly before the death threat started. That's a whole different topic. But he got, let's see, the tooth they used, was dug up by the curator of the James farm in 1978, and it was dug up in the yard. It could have been anybody's tooth. It was also, when it was dug up with a hog's tooth, a dog's tooth, and several other animal bones. And it was kept in a Tupperware jar and passed around. Multiple people had handled it over the years, which is contamination or cross-contamination with the DNA. Nothing about it was a strict chain of custody. It was just a farce. Not only that, Stephen Caruso, he used to be the Clay County commissioner. Mom and I interviewed him, and he claimed he called it a tawdry sideshow. He said, the hair, they also tested a hair that they claimed they got out of the grave. But somehow that was in the possession of the museum, or the museum held ownership of it, but it was in the possession of Stephen Caruso. The court ordered Stephen Caruso to turn over the hair. He said he wouldn't turn it over. because it was a farce. They ordered him to turn it over. So he pulled a hair from his buddy's head, who was the Clay County Parks director, John Hartman. And he submitted that. They tested the hair and claimed it was Jesse's hair and had the same dye in his hair. They based a large part of a documentary around that hair, and it came from the Clay County Parks director's head. It was
So many other discrepancies. Like they said he was buried in a metal casket. It was a wooden casket. Yeah, just so many different discrepancies. But like even the headstones in Mount Olivet were moved around, they said constantly. So it's like they didn't even really know, like, how could they know who the exact body was with that headstone? Because they were constantly moving them around like musical chairs. I mean, just
that's the other thing. The grave that they exhumed had multiple bodies in it. It had male and female bones. And the story of when they moved Jesse from he was originally buried in the front yard. The body was originally buried in the front yard of the James Farm, and where the James Farm, which is now the museum also. Well, in 1909, they exhumed the body and took it from the farm to Mount Olivet Cemetery in Kearney. And it's documented. The bottom of the casket fell out, and they had to get another casket and put all the bones in. Yet Professor Stars, who wasn't even a forensic, he was a law attorney. He was an attorney and a professor of law. He had no background in forensics other than it was a hobby of his. He liked digging up famous people and showboating. So he claimed the body was anatomically correct and buried face down. Now, I doubt, with all the bones in the human body, that they could have put it, after it fell apart and collapsed on the way to the cemetery. I doubt the family could have put it together anatomically correct. All the foot bones, all the various bones. And on top of that, why would they put it face down?
Yeah, that's wild.
And then also having a woman's body in the same grave. I mean, that doesn't make sense at all. So
right.
That whole story is crazy.
Right. And it would seem too, like any DNA, evidence, when you're talking about the fake death, Wood being a first cousin, there's going to be some similarities in DNA too, just because of that.
Exactly. And they tested mitochondrial DNA, which comes from the mother.
Right.
And it's right from the mother. It'll pass down to the son, but the son won't pass down the mitochondrial DNA to his children. But that strictly goes through the female line. So they tested for mitochondrial DNA, they claimed, but they didn't test. This is another thing, and this blew our mind. They claimed there were no other relatives other than this Mr. Jackson in Oklahoma. So they said that was the only guy they could test it against. And everybody knew. There was a lady who was she was of a direct female line from Zerelda. She lived in California. She was an elderly lady in her 90s, and her name was Sue Laura Hale. And she was living when this all happened, and they knew about it, but they never even bothered to ask her. So Mom called her and asked if she would go to her doctor and have him, take a blood sample and send it through strict chain of custody to our DNA guy in San Antonio. And she did. And when we had the DNA tested, it showed a definite relationship with Sue Laura Hale and my mother. Not through mitochondrial DNA, because they would have had different mitochondrial DNA, but it showed that they have a definite relationship. The DNA doctor we use said the next step, just for something this big, you need to do it extremely professional and go exhume everybody from mom, or you don't have to exhume them, by the way. All you do is drill a tiny hole and take a dime-sized sample of bone. That's all that's needed. So everybody from mom, her dad, her grandmother, and then Jesse, and then compare that to Zerelda or Thule or Hell, which we already have.
And so, I mean, whenever you said she shot holes in this theory, wow, there's way too many.
It goes deep.
What's that?
Oh, it goes deeper than that too. I mean, that's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. It's just
way many holes for them to come out and say it was 99% certain to be the identity of Jesse Woodson James.
That was another thing. During the what do you call that? What did you call it? The coroner's inquisition. After Jesse was claimed killed in St. Joe, Missouri, they had a coroner's inquest, and Jesse's alleged wife, Z. Mims, who we believe was actually Wood Hike's wife, they asked her which of Jesse's fingers were missing, if any. She didn't know. She didn't know if he had any missing fingers or not. She didn't know. Made just normal details that anybody would know. You'd know this stuff about somebody you were dating if they were missing a finger or not. She didn't know his age. She didn't know if he was missing a finger or not. Yet she knew in great detail every piece of jewelry she had that she claimed had been stolen during all the melee after the alleged assassination. Not only that, the shot. If you've ever been in the St. Joe Museum where they claim he was shot, the story goes he stood up on a stool or a chair to dust a sampler. Samplers are like, a home sweet home. He was supposedly dusting that standing on a stool or chair. If you've ever been in that house, that ceiling is so low, you'd have to be 5 foot tall or shorter probably to need a stool to get up to dust. And it was, nothing adds up. On top of that, the shot, Bob Ford was supposedly up about 5 feet away from Jesse when he shot. His arm was extended. It was a .44. He shoots him in the back of the head. There was another lady. She was a gun expert with the New Mexico State Police. She tried to reenact that whole thing. She said, first of all, with a .44, he wouldn't have had a face. Even if it was loaded at half charge like they often did back then. They would load their powder with half charge. It made the bullet more accurate, stuff like that. But anyway, she said he wouldn't have a face at point blank range with a .44 in the back of the head. And there would have been powder burns and there would have been a lot more damage. Now, the body that they had that they claimed was Jesse had an entry wound, but no exit wound. So, I mean, experts from multiple areas all agree that there's something really wrong with that whole story.
Wow. What do you think, Teresa, is the most compelling evidence on this?
Oh, wow. For me, I would say the pictures matching. To me, that's the most compelling. There's just too many. Like we have, some experts have identified Zerelda matching pictures of, our pictures of J.L. Courtney's mother. So that's one. I mean, it's just too much. And then Jesse James matching James L. Courtney. And, it's just, to me, that's the most compelling. And the point, trying not to ramble, but, I think Danny already mentioned it, but, we have a picture of, he went under the assumed name James L. Courtney, but in the photo album, there's a picture of his mother with the dress on in this unique floral print. Well, in the history books, there's a picture of Jesse James's mother, Zerelda, with the exact same dress and the floral print. And they said that was really, back then, it's not like you have today, the mass production of clothes. So that alone was incredible. And that they matched identically. So to me, it's the pictures.
Yeah. So everything that you just said, pretty much, I mean, just on a cursory level, I'm convinced. Okay. I'm convinced. And I think that people can get the book and read it. And I'm sure that there's a lot more detail in there that, you know,
Oh,
you can
yes.
you can examine on your own. But let's just go down this thought path for a second, okay? I'm adequately convinced that something untoward, at least at a minimum, happened. And certainly it seems like uh definitely had the motive to do it, had the intelligence to pull it off, and had the right circumstances. Really, you think about this, you have a first cousin who you look like the guy's dead. We'll wait till the frost breaks and the ground's a little bit softer, and yeah, and then I'll change my name to Courtney, last name to Courtney, and you know, everything will be great. Uh, and probably the means. I mean, think about this. They've been successfully robbing banks, millions of dollars. That's what I want to get into next. But they had the means if they needed to pay someone off, if they needed to do whatever, they had the means to do it, right?
Mhm.
So,
It did have a lot of loyalty among the group, it seemed like, as well. So, it's just yeah, the inner circle, to have that kind of trust in that group, I think really that alone, I think helped him um be successful with faking his death.
right. So if you get, it's like everything else. You get a band of brothers all rowing in the same direction, with means. Yeah, it's going to be tough to stop. And as long as you don't have that, that one Judas, I guess you'd call it, um,
Yeah.
you're good to go. So my question, I guess, is, I mean, I believe that what you're saying is accurate. Okay. And so let's go down this road. You come to a fork in the road where did he or did he not fake his death? Let's go down this road of reality with it. Okay. He faked his death. All right. That immediately changes everything. Um, People aren't going to necessarily be blaming as much stuff on him. They're not going to be maybe using the convenient excuse that it was Jesse James and the James gang. Were they continuous in the robbing of things, trains, banks, and all that, or did they come up with a different? Was things different? I guess after this,
They were different. He kept they they kept up the crime only in different ways. It went more underground instead of robbing and hitting banks and stages. They even robbed the steamship. Uh, that trip I mentioned that they took to Louisiana, they robbed a steamship. Uh, so they hit a lot of targets, stagecoaches. Anyway, yeah, it changed everything. Um, they he was still like in his day book. He would mention some men came up, and you could tell he was always real cautious. He would write so and so came up, said his name was so and so. He would end the sentence with "so he says," like he was suspicious of everybody, which didn't sound like a normal farmer. He was suspicious of everybody, and that. But the reason the men were coming up to his house were to change gold for what he called specie. That was what they called cash back then. So men were coming up. People knew to go to Jesse and change their gold or silver out for cash, like he was his own bank.
wow,
And yeah,
People come to his house one day questioning him that things weren't adding up to be a farmer to have all the things he had. Like he was even being questioned by the tax examiners.
yeah. And that was the other thing. When he would mention like some days he would say, "Woke up, cut a half an acre of hay with the boys." Different guy, the men around him. But then that was all the work he did in a couple of weeks, sometimes longer. And then, or he'd say, I grained half a cowhide. And just stuff like that. Was like every once in a while he'd do some type of labor, but not that often.
Interesting. Okay, so this is what kind of gets me thinking. You said $60,000 at First Bank. All right. And this is one of many, dozens, hundreds, I don't know. But
it was dozens, yeah. Dozens.
Let's just say, you know what, $5,000 a bank. Well, 12 banks, that's your $60,000 again, which you said is millions. We're talking millions in today's terms.
Yeah.
Man, you're a farmer. Okay, let's just look at it in today's terms. You're a farmer, out there in the field, and you've got millions, compared to everybody else around. And I think millions back in that day might be a little bit different because, you didn't have the ability to go and, get on Amazon and get something really cool that comes from, somewhere, like there are certain things that people have in their homes. For instance, someone wealthy who's kind of a geek might have, the sharper image stormtrooper, or something like that,
Yeah.
but like, maybe someone that doesn't have the means doesn't have that in their house. So I say all that to say this, it's like if he had this money as a farmer, it would have to be raising a lot of red flags. Like you said, tax examiners, law enforcement, so on and so forth, right? Lots of flags.
Oh, and like, I just checked it up. $60,000 back then, like the common currency at that time was like $20 gold pieces. So if it was all $20 gold pieces, that $60,000 in $20 gold pieces is 3,000 $20 gold pieces. And today's a $20 gold piece is roughly very close to an ounce of gold. And today's pricing for an ounce of gold is $3,340, something like that. So that equals over $9 million, between 9 and 10 million, just on their first robbery.
And he loved cars. Like he was always, when later on in the 1900s, I think they said like every year he was buying a new Ford. Like he loved the Ford cars. So that was a lot too.
Wow. So yeah, okay, so here we go. In the modern world, all right, you see things like this happen, and you see, potentially fake deaths and all kinds of stuff like that. It seems like there's more to the story, and usually that more to the story, at least in today's world, is they are in some way, shape, or form connected with either some agency or something secret in some way, shape, or form that everybody knows what's going on. The public doesn't have to know, but this person is serving another function for the powers that be. That's what it always ends up being. So was anything like that the case?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, and I agree exactly. I mean, first of all, like you said, that first robbery is on the level of, in my opinion, of like when the mob hit the Lufthansa heist. It was like the biggest heist in history at that time, dollar wise. So it reminded me of that. You have to be connected for things that you're piecing it together perfectly. I mean, it's like putting a puzzle together. You have to be connected when it's that kind of money. If it was just a stagecoach with a couple $100, people overlook that. But when it's large amounts and you do it multiple times and you keep getting away with it, that's an embarrassment to the government and everybody else. They were hitting so many trains that a lot of the railroad companies were rerouting their routes to go around Missouri. It was hurting the economy of Missouri. So, I mean, that's pretty bad. So, but yeah, going back into what you were pointing at, there were groups. There was one group during the Civil War, a Confederate-backed secret group called the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now, there's no proof that Jesse was. I have never seen any proof that Jesse was in that. They also claim Albert Pike was part of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and the Knights were. Their whole mission during the Civil War was to there was sabotage, there were spies. They even plotted the assassination of Abe Lincoln. People claim that John Wilkes Booth was in that group, and Mary Surratt and the others. But anyway, there's Knights of the Golden Circle. They were like spies. After the Civil War, their alleged goal was to raise as many funds as they could, any way they could, to try and fund a second Civil War, which always reminds me of two rival football teams. You know, the loser always wants another shot, and that sounds like that. But there is no proof that he was a member of that. But there is proof that under his alias of James Lafayette Courtney, he was a Freemason, Scottish Rite, and he was in the Scottish Rite in Texas. So we know he was a Freemason, and I'm a Freemason. But that what I'm trying to get at, I think a lot of the KGC were also Freemasons, and I'm trying to say stuff without making the wrong people mad. But he was no angel. They were no angels. There's a lot of Freemasons, and I'll just say it. There were a lot of Freemasons who were also pirates and outlaws. And there's proof of that, like on his trip, and I'll make this quick. On his trip to Louisiana that he's got in his day book, he mentions every place he went and everywhere he stayed. One night he stayed with a man in a house, and the man's name was Gervais Fontenot. I thought, okay, everybody he mentioned in his letters or diaries, we always research as much as we can. So I wanted to know more about Gervais Fontenot. Right off the bat, I find out Gervais Fontenot was a retired U.S. Marshal. And I thought, why is an outlaw staying the night at a U.S. Marshal's house? I know crooked cops are no secret, but I think the ties went deeper than that. It will probably tied back to the Civil War. But I kept researching, and I found his Mr. Fontenot's family, his current relatives, online, and they had an extensive family tree. They'd done their genealogy. It was, they did a great job of it, but this is the shocker to me. It just blew my mind when I found it out. Gervais Fontenot, retired U.S. Marshal, was also the nephew of Jean Lafitte, the pirate. And I thought, oh my God, this is weird. Jesse James was staying the night with Jean Lafitte's nephew while he was on a robbing trip through Louisiana. That blew my mind. I kept double checking it, making sure I'd read it right. He was the nephew of Jean Lafitte. It goes further, and this was before I joined the Masons. Jean Lafitte, reading about him, I found a link about him on the website of the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, the Masonic Lodge, the Grand Lodge of Louisiana, and they had all this history about different figures in Louisiana. They mentioned Jean Lafitte during the Battle of New Orleans. Before the Battle of New Orleans, he met with Andrew Jackson before Andrew had become a president, and they had Masonic communications. And you can't have Masonic communications unless both parties are Masons. So, I mean, there's just more proof. Jean Lafitte was a Mason. Jesse was a Mason. And there's a lot that gets into the treasure side of it. But there was a lot of Masons involved with that.
Wow.
So I hope I said that clearly, but I was just trying to answer. When you mentioned deeper connections, I think that's where it all points to.
Okay. Yeah, wow. That's just great.
There's even evidence that like Billy the Kid and Jesse James had a meeting. It makes you wonder sometimes, did it extend beyond, just like the Jesse James gang into Billy the Kid and other outlaws?
They tried to join up. They met in July July 1879 in Las Vegas, New Mexico. It was after the Northfield, Minnesota disaster for the James gang. And Jesse was trying, they said they met, and it's documented. Jesse and Billy met in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And they were considering teaming up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And well, another thing that's interesting that's kind of off the record, but as a connection we had that told us, who's also with the Masons, but he said that a lot of times they're recruited. For example, like Jesse was known for his shooting skills. Like he was like an excellent dead on, shooter. And that, I think they mentioned it kind of caught the attention of these groups. Like, hey, he can be used for something with us that, carry out things that we need. And that kind of made some sense how he may have been, infiltrated into these groups for his skills.
And there's always like in his situation, I think there was a price to pay. We help you here, you do this. It's kind of like it reminds me of mafia in that case. We scratch your back, you scratch ours kind of thing. We helped you fake death or get away from whoever. So, now he owed them, and it was a heavy price. There were family stories, a lot of family stories about the fights he had with different groups.
Different groups,
like the Masons,
okay,
and a couple other people. But yeah,
wow, huh? And I mean, you write about this in other books. You've got Jesse James' The Lost Templar Treasure. You've got Secret History of the Wild Wild West, and so your research into Jesse James is taking you on a pretty wild path of possibility.
Really wild. I mean, just the fact that Jesse James faked his death is a wild story. I mean, and then finding all the proof. Our late mother spearheaded that. She grew up hearing that story all her life, and then once we got in college, she had the time to follow her dream. She wanted to know the truth, and she got the family photos, took them to all the experts I'd mentioned earlier, and it just went from there. And then the treasure map that was passed down through the family caught all our eyes. Who wouldn't want to find a treasure? I mean, it was amazing just to have the map, but it never was like a normal treasure map. It had no topographic markers. It was just a geometric grid. It was a geometric design with dotted lines, solid lines, and some normally spelt words, but the rest, some words were written all in code, and he used the different codes. Like some of it was just substitution numbers for letters, but then on another one he'd do the same thing, only in reverse order. And nobody in my immediate family or my relatives who passed it down could ever find it. And that's when Wagner Carr, his former attorney general for the state of Texas, contacted our mom after she'd written her first book, and there was an article in Texas Monthly Magazine about her story. And Wagner Carr contacted her, and at first he was real skeptical. And I mean, and I don't blame him. At the time, we were like, we were so naive when we started this, but he contacted mom. He ended up believing her story. She showed him all the evidence. It was like, my God, you're right. So then he had his driver show us where 3 large caches of gold were buried, and they were buried, but the state recovered it. I asked him where they took it, and he never would answer me. I didn't expect him to answer. But Wagner Carr was also a Mason. And for people who know about like the JFK assassination, Wagner Carr was on the Warren Commission for the JFK assassination. And that's a whole different spider web. I purposely keep away from that topic.
Yeah, there's so many rabbit holes I mean, when our mom started out with this, she was just so excited, thinking everyone would be so happy that Jesse James didn't really die. And then it just led down so many other new enlightened stories, like just so many different rabbit holes.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So here we go. Everything that you have kind of dropped here today, as I, parse this information, outside looking in. All right, outside looking in. So here you have this young guy who is admittedly a great marksman, that is not recruited into the Army during the Civil War when anybody, any age basically, could have got in and fought. That is number one, weird. All right. Number two, he still ending up in this with a group that is, while everybody else is, given a pardon, the group that he is with specifically is not given a pardon, which means that this group is known about on a governmental level. All right. And obviously had to have been known about pretty well, definitely on the radar, to say, hey, you're not, and he tries to turn himself in, gets shot in the chest. Interesting. So then all of a sudden you have this just ton of, almost loosey-goosey, man. We're going to do stuff that nobody's ever done before. We're going to rob banks during the day. We're going to rob, riverboats. I mean, just like, trains and all this stuff. We're going to make the equivalent of millions of dollars. And sorry, but we're going to have the audacity to live as a simple farmer, but kind of not really hide the fact that we are well-to-do. Hey, bring your dollar bills. I'll exchange. I've got the gold for you. That's a big deal. That's a red flag. So, and then, obviously people are looking for him. He's an outlaw, and it doesn't sound like he's hiding all that well. It sounds like he's hiding in plain sight. And then, the convenience of his first cousin who looks like him dying, so on and so forth, and just makes sense. And all the stuff that you laid out. So this story makes sense. And then moving into afterwards, how there might have been a different level with, some of these society things, the Masons, whatever it is, you start talking about, Templar treasure, and you start talking about, pirates, and, nobody really brought this up, but, you start talking about the Knights Templar, and the treasure that disappeared, whenever, the Pope decided to turn on them and kill everyone on Friday the 13th. Well, all that treasure left, and a lot of people think it went through Scotland, and this guy's a Scottish Rites Mason, and just, and you start looking too at the history of all of that, and you realize that in some ways, we, after World War II, those 5 years after World War II are just wild what happened. But, that's whenever we get the NSA and the CIA and all these other things. And it's almost as if it's like a governmental version of what some of these things like that maybe Jesse James was involved with. It almost feels that way. I'm not saying that's what it is, but what's your thoughts on?
No, definitely.
Are we over the target with what I just said?
Yeah, you're all over it.
Yeah, you're like pretty spot on with it all.
You've got it down, and that amazes me that you pieced it together so well on the later, basically the descendants of that group he was in.
fascinating. It's
Yeah.
fascinating because, you know, and it really starts. I mean, I do a lot of um, research on World War II, and of course that's going to lead you to what happened post World War II. But to understand World War II, you got to go back and you got to understand World War One. And in order to understand World War One, you got to understand what happened early in the 1900s and then into the late 1800s, all the way back to the Civil War. So you end up just becoming like a history buff and nut.
Yeah.
Because you start connecting these pieces together.
Yes.
And I've never heard anybody. So this is number one. Thank you, because this has been fascinating to understand that. I really feel like Jesse James faked his own death. All right. And I really feel like there are probably a lot of people that knew that he faked his death, and I really believe that some of those people probably were in positions of power on a governmental level. And this probably all stemmed from money and whatnot that happens. War is a terrible thing. The Civil War, man, there's so many stories of things that just happened that were untoward, you know. And
Oh yeah.
so
Even in Missouri, Thomas T. Crittenden, the governor at the time, was related to Jesse. So there's the governor, and then the Sheriff Timberlake in Clay County, was related to Jesse. And then the sheriff in the neighboring county, he was a Courtney, who was also related to Jesse's family.
Yeah.
It was just, it's like he would probably.
On and on. It's like if you sat down and connected all the dots, like they just, it's almost never ending how the dots connect to so many different connections. It's crazy.
yeah. So let me ask you one final question here, man. This has been fascinating. Okay, I appreciate you guys so much, but let me just ask you kind of I want to hear both of your opinions on this. Okay, so everything that we kind of went over, what does it mean, and what kind of did it was it giving birth to something, and if so, what was that? Is there links that even can connect to today that go all the way back to this? I don't want you to get in trouble, and I don't want you to say things you don't feel comfortable with, but I just feel like all this stuff is interconnected, and it's connected through history. In your research, how does that all play out throughout history, even up until today?
Well, it seems like it's been connected to yeah, it's so much. Like, I'm just gonna say it. Sometimes I'm at the point like, well, if something happens, it happens. I don't care. But the Kennedy connection, there's a connection with the Kennedys. It's so many different. It seems like there's other stories that we've been told he's been connected to in history. But yeah, it spans a lot. It spans a whole lot. And I do think it's connected to today's stuff as well. I think it's shaped a lot of today's stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your thoughts? Yeah.
Oh, it is. She's right. That goes deeper. Well, like when you mentioned Kennedy, Wagner Carr, former Attorney General of the state of Texas, he was a friend of LBJ. A friend of LBJ on the Warren Commission in investigating the assassination of JFK. Not only that, a guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of Billy Saul Estes.
No.
A lot of people claim he was a Texas con man. He was infamous, famous. He conned a lot of people. He was selling non-existent fertilizer plants to foreign buyers. And he was also the first man in American history to be acquitted because of cameras. He was acquitted for murder because of cameras in the courtroom. If you read his story, he was a bad man. He killed a lot of people who had dirt on LBJ. Any traces that could tie back to money that they got through the commodities markets for LBJ's elections or his campaigns, those guys committed suicide with, like a shot with a rifle in the back of the head twice, stuff like that. That kind of story. But I met the guy. We met the man we were with Wagner Carr, and we met, and Wagner Carr they both claimed, oh, we've never met. Yet they were in the corner of a cemetery during an exhumation we attended, and they were talking like the best of friends, like talking about old times. And I thought, okay, yeah, you don't know each other, but weird to meet a famous, like a lot of people called Billy Saul Estes, LBJ's hitman.
Well,
and he basically was. If all the allegations, the FBI was after him until he died, and he died an old man, and they never caught it. And there's a part of me that respects the hell out of that. I can't help it. It just, it's like being that smart. And I would imagine, even if you're an FBI agent, you've got to respect. It's almost like respecting your prey. It's an odd. I guess that's an odd thing to say, but back to your answering your question, my thoughts on that. Yeah, I think it's a continuation of the Templar. When the Catholic Church took them down, it wasn't just the Templar. There were the Gnostic Christians, the Cathars, all these different groups in Europe and elsewhere. If you spoke your mind, if you were a scientist and you found out the earth was round, you could die or lose everything you had. So there's all these intelligent, like-minded people who have a common enemy, and a lot of them banded together. Sir Francis Bacon was one of the major players in that. He's known as the father of modern-day Freemasonry. And every time I talk about that, I get goosebumps. I don't know why. It's weird. But anyway, Sir Francis Bacon is known as the father of modern-day Freemasonry. He was instrumental in the Rosicrucians, which he didn't found, but they were around, and he helped. They all helped form different secret societies with the same common enemy. At the time, it was the Catholic Church, and that's been like a Cold War through the centuries. And a lot of Masons don't like me saying it. I don't care. I've heard it, and it's written. When I was director of economic development and tourism in Marshall, Texas for a few years, I met a guy, and he was a Knight of Columbus. They're Catholics. Now, down in Austin, I've got friends who are Knights of Columbus, but in the rural part of Texas that he was telling me about, and I've been told by other people that Knights of Columbus had a standing order. If they could kill a Mason and get by with it, they were forgiven. And so there was tensions back and forth between the two groups for as long as the Knights of Columbus have been around, and between Jesuits and all the other secretive stuff. Trying to keep from going down a million rabbit holes on that, because I could talk for days on that. Long story short, I think Jesse was he was important as an outlaw and for American history, especially in the Old West. But he was, in the scheme of that, he was one guy out of countless men throughout the centuries who were fighting for the same goal. I don't know exactly what the goal is. I do know that they laid out their treasure templates, and they were big into Kabbalah, occult Kabbalah, Jewish Kabbalah, Christian Kabbalah, and other mystic traditions from the Middle East. But they were big in that. Their design on their template ties in with the Kabbalistic tree of life. I think when they buried the treasures, they did it for a purpose. It was more, if you ever read Sir Francis Bacon's The New Atlantis, it basically tells why they did it. They wanted a land where you were free to worship how you wanted, basically what America was meant to be, when it started. I think that was their goal. And I think it was a good goal on that side of it. But just like any group, you're going to have some bad apples here and there. Also, when you're fighting a powerful enemy, you've got to have some bad guys on your side too. And I think that's what it boils down to. And I think it's ongoing today. I think we see it in the news all the time, only we don't recognize it all the time. But one last thing I'll say and I'll shut up, I promise. When I came out with my first book about the treasures, the current Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Timothy Hogan, wrote a glowing endorsement of my book saying I cracked part of the code to the treasures of the temple in Jerusalem. And I explained in detail the method in which they buried the treasures, in which they moved and buried the treasures. So that was like, I couldn't have had a better endorsement or a better, I guess, that was so flattering for me that the Grand Master of the Knights Templar giving me a compliment like that was just amazing for me. And that made my year, made my decade. So
it also kind of justifies, in a world where you can't say everything without, getting flagged or whatnot.
Yeah.
It seems like, when it kind of justifies that, hey, I'm on the right path by the headmaster of the Knights Templar. So, kind of gives you a little best.
We were also told that Grandpa Courtney, aka Jesse James, but that he funded some major historical events in the past too. That he helped fund and get a lot of the projects going. I wish I could say which one, but that might really cause a lot of trouble. But it was a big one.
All right.
And they made a movie on it not too long ago. We'll just say that.
Oh, right off the bat, when we started our research, I would take Mom down to the Texas State Archives in Austin. We were followed at the archives. The librarian told us, don't sign your names. When you walk in, he always told us, sign the register. And one day I walk in with Mom, and he whispers to us, don't sign your names. So, we didn't know what he was talking about. We'd just gotten into the research side of it. And he said, they're watching. When Mom asked why, he said, they're watching. And he just turned around and walked away. Well, 2 men were watching us, and we left. We came back. We were going like once or twice a week to the archives. They finally introduced themselves. The first time they introduced themselves, it was an older man and a younger man. The older man identified himself, his real name, and his past occupation. He was a cop in Dallas. And he mentioned out of the blue that he was a block away from JFK when he was assassinated, which at the time I thought, wow, that's cool. But you start piecing things together and it makes you wonder. The other guy introduced himself. He gave his real name, Jeff Adams, but then he said he was a house painter. And I never thought about this until I saw the movie about Jimmy Hoffa a few years ago. I can't remember the name of the movie. De Niro was in it. Anyway, the hitman De Niro was playing. He called himself a house painter. And it just, when I saw the movie, it made the hairs on my arms stand up. But anyway, the guy finally admitted who he was. He's Jeff Adams, and he was the researcher for the State Bar of Texas. And they warned us. They said, you can prove who your great-grandfather was, just never mention any names that tie in with the Texas power structure. And at the time Mom looked at him and said, well, who's the Texas power structure? And the older man just kind of smirked and said, you'll find out.
Wow.
It was just weird stuff like that. That's when everything, that was a turning point with us, is when everything started getting a lot stranger than we thought it would be.
Well, yeah, and it obviously let you know that I'm on the right path here. I'm over the target. Yeah.
I feel like it's also connected not only to like the treasure and important groups, but also it's got a lot of just from things we've heard, spiritual significance too. There's just a lot that one day when we both don't care, we'll probably just come out with a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well, we do a lot of that also on the Ryan Files, where there's a lot of stuff between, unnamed, societies and whatnot, but it also, like, you get into occult ritual practice stuff and government agencies, money. You get into research, science. Just there's so many
interconnections. Yeah, it's like a web, and they're all just kind of connected.
Yeah, and once you start,
it's fascinating.
Once you open that can of, once you,
that is it.
Yeah,
yes,
it's like you can't get the toothpaste back in the tube once you realize.
Exactly. What is that? It's kind of like the Pandora's box. Once it's opened, there's so much comes from that.
But it also immediately things start to click and make sense.
Yes.
Otherwise wouldn't. Yeah.
But once you get to that point, there's a lot of stuff. Teresa and I and our late mother, we used to laugh about it all the time. It's like, I mean, you get to a certain point where you're deep in that rabbit hole and you know it's real, you know what's really going on, and you can't talk to a normal person about that kind of, a lot of that, because they're going to look at you like, yeah, you've gone off the deep end. And actually, I did the very same thing I'm saying to a couple of people who tried to tell us stuff when we first started. I looked a guy in the face. I said, no offense, I don't want to offend you, but that sounds crazy as hell. And he looked disappointed and walked away. And years later, I found out the stuff he was telling me was just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
So,
yep. That's kind of where I'm at. I've seen and heard too much to almost dismiss anything at this point.
Yeah. And I do feel like, though, more people are becoming more aware. I think, so I think people in general are opening up.
Yeah.
Waking up to things. Yeah.
Well, and another point on that is it's just, it's now I'm getting tongue tied trying to make the point. Sorry.
Okay.
There's things that, even now, like the last few years, things both of us have kind of gone through some things we've never mentioned. We just kind of talk amongst it with ourselves and a few other people, but just crazy stuff. Like, it just seems like it just it's the Pandora's box. It's like more stuff is opening and opening. And sometimes I feel like I'm living in a Twilight Zone. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say is, it doesn't really, I've told my brother this a long time ago. He said, I don't believe some of that, like he was talking about the Kabbalah, and I was telling him about the treasure stuff. He didn't want to hear it. He's a Baptist deacon. And I thought, well, okay, if that bothers you, I won't talk to you about it. But I told him, I said, it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. The thing that changes things are the people in power believe this. And that's what makes it a threat or dangerous or makes it so whatever. If the people in power believe it and they've got the means to make things happen, that's what makes it important.
Yeah, that is the crux of it, right, Daniel? Yeah. Right, Teresa? Yeah. That's the crux of it. I don't have to believe in these things myself per se. And I say me, meaning anybody. You don't have to believe in them yourself, but what you have to understand is that the people in positions of power at the top believe it.
Dude. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they'll move mountains to either suppress the information or use it for their agenda.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope that people understand that we're just talking as researchers and people who are not afraid to just, see something, say something, almost, like we're in this because we're not satisfied with just, what the common narrative is when it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, maybe it's a duck. And that's kind of what this is all about. Just, researching and being honest instead of wanting to form your own opinion instead of the opinion that you're told you have to have. So,
oh, yeah.
Man, this has been awesome.
It also helps connect us with other people who've gone through similar experiences.
For sure.
I mean, the more we talk, the more we see that there's other people who have gone through a lot of similar experiences in a different format. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely not boring.
So are you guys working on anything new? I mean, tell us a little bit about all your books, where to get all your books, all that stuff. And if you have any kind of website, social media, obviously plug it all, and then are you working on anything now new?
Yeah, well, I'm combining the three nonfiction books that I wrote and that Teresa co-authored the second with me, combining those into a novel. And, it's interesting. I thought, wow, a novel would be so easy. You don't have to do this or that. It's just, you can fill in the gaps, and it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. It's like I got so used to just finding the facts and writing the findings down.
When the facts don't get erased.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, we're doing that and always researching. You can never stop. Once you start researching, it's like you can't stop. I want to know, that could probably end up, I don't really care what happens. I want to find more answers. Every answer you find seems to raise a dozen more questions. And that's so researching and writing and just keep going at that. There's a lot more plans, but those are just plans right now. I'm actually writing the book, so I'm not gonna go into detail about just the ideas and dreams we have about it.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on. If you guys ever have anything else you want to talk about, I tell everyone, if you come on the Ryan Files, I'm so grateful and thankful. If there's anything I can ever do for you, though, please reach out to me. And
thank you. We really appreciated being on here.
Yeah, this will be.
Yeah, it was a great honor. I appreciate it.
People are going to be fascinated by this. And thank you so much. Well, I hope to talk to you again. You guys are great, man. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
That's all I have to say. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, brother, sister, awesome. This has been amazing. Teresa, thank you so much. Daniel, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
What a ride. From fake deaths to financial warfare, secret brotherhoods, buried clues. This conversation just blew the dust off a story most people thought was already finished. A huge thank you to Daniel and Teresa Duke for bringing this mystery to life and giving us a front row seat to the other side of Jesse James. And now I've got to ask you, do you believe Jesse faked his death? Or was it all just legend? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you want to dive deeper, grab the books at Amazon.com or InnerTraditions.com. They're packed with photos, documents, Jesse's personal diary, and even more mind-bending connections you didn't hear today. And if you're enjoying what we're doing here, help us keep this going. Subscribe to the Ryan Files on YouTube. Become a channel member. Get early access to new episodes and exclusive emojis. Or visit theryanfiles.com for everything The Ryan Files. And if you want even more, become an agent over at patreon.com/The Ryan Files, where you'll unlock aftermath videos, the discussion after the discussion. You've helped us grow this far, and only with your support can we take it to the next level. So as always, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Be amazing, be positive, and stay curious out there, my friends, and I'll see you right here next time on The Ryan Files.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan Files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan Files.